Hello and welcome to Adding Motion. So at this point, you should be pretty happy with the artwork you have and getting ready to add some motion to your piece. So one thing that's different from my previous video that I didn't talk about is that I've got this heart on the bottom right part of the screen, and I add it as kind of like a heart-shaped window. And now I am using the motion path feature of Adobe Fresco to make it look like the bubbles are coming out. And I have played around with the FX or the effects to add multiples and to scatter the bubbles. So I do have a path for the bubbles, but then I also want them to be not exactly following the path, just to be scattered a little bit. So I played around with that, and as you can see, you just need to draw. If you're doing something like bubbles and you want them to be the same size and same color, you just need to draw it once, and then you can have multiple paths with one element. So that's why I only had 3 bubbles. I had yellow, white, and blue to begin with, but when you see everything playing, you can see that there's like tons of bubbles coming out, which is awesome and saves us tons of time. After adding motion, I just played around with the order of the layers, because sometimes when it was like on the top layer, I found like it looked like it was coming like out of in front of all of the characters and looked unnatural. And then when it was too far behind, when it was on the bottom layer, it looked like it was coming from outside of the bathtub, not as opposed to the inside. So you just have to use your eyes and just play around with it and see what looks the most natural. And that's basically what I'm doing. And of course, you can also play around with like speed options. Do you want it to retain the original speed that you had when you were drawing the path, or do you want uniform speed? Do you want to ease in or out? Ease in, ease out your path. How many frames are you going to be wanting the motion path to be using? And do you want to randomize that path? Lots of choices to make. And I invite you guys to just try out different things. But for the bubbles, I was just mainly playing around with the multiples and the scatter effect. I think the motion feature on Adobe Fresco is definitely a game changer, because you're able to do so much on this one app. And so it's really, really awesome. Yeah, as you can see, I'm mainly playing around with the path effects, multiples, and scatter. With a path, there's so many things you can do. I've seen people create paths for like spaceships. I've seen people use paths and frame by frame animation to make it look like bees or butterflies are flying. So many things. I love the simplicity of these bubbles, and I love that I just had to draw 3 bubbles but can still achieve this effect. Just fixing the water a little bit here so that it looks a bit more natural for the bubbles that are coming out. And you will have to look very closely as you do motion, especially if you've got tons of layers like me. There might be some elements that don't look as natural once you add motion. So as you guys know, there's two ways to add motion on Adobe Fresco. You can use the motion path or frame by frame animation, and I do that for the bunny's arms here. Basically, I just use the frame by frame animation by creating a new motion layer right here, and then I just redrew the arms. So it's a little bit, yeah, it looks like it's kind of moving. It's moving super fast right now, but you can change that by playing around with the frames. Onion skin is very useful if you want to see the previous frame, kind of like it's a lower opacity, so you can tell it's like the previous frame. And if you have more than two motion layers, you can see it for the the other layers too. You can choose how many layers you want to see the onion skin for in the function, in the settings options, I mean. In my case, I just stuck with two motion layers to just keep it really simple. Obviously, you can combine the two different ways to do animation, motion path and frame by frame. Motion path is usually used when you want an object to follow a defined path, and frame by frame is essentially when you redraw each frame to give that illusion of motion. So Bunny just has that one arm moving, and then I went back to Bear and I used path motion again for the face. And you really have to look at the full path and just make sure you're happy with it, because in the first time I tried to do this, it looked like the bear's facial features were like going outside its face. So just see what it looks like, and it's super important to see what the motion looks like in conjunction with the other elements of your piece that is moving. If there's something that looks off, like something looks like it's going too slowly or too fast, then you go back and make adjustments. One thing that might be a little bit tricky, and it certainly was tricky for me, was figuring out where the center of each layer was. Here you can see with this egg on top of the bear, I couldn't really figure out where I needed to start the path to make it look as natural as possible. You really just have to play around with the path to figure that out. Last but not least, for Froggy, I just use frame by frame animation, and I just redrew Froggy's arms, but it was moving way too fast in comparison to everything else that's in motion. And so what I ended up doing was I copied each of the layers, I think at least twice or maybe even 3 times. And so like motion layer 1 was the same as motion layer 2, and then you had a different motion layer 3, a repeat of motion layer 3, and then another different arm placement for the last one, and then just repeat that. Just to make sure Froggy's arm movement was a bit slower, because I imagine Froggy to be kind of just stretching a little bit, stretching its arms, just, placing its arms from the back of its head and then just like placing it out and putting it back. So you have to think about what you want the motion to look like. Do you want it to be calm or really fast? Do you want there to be excitement? Lots of different things. And even after I added motion, I went back and just fixed up a little bit with like the water. As you can tell here, the water looks like it's going out of the bathtub, and I just wanted to be contained, so I'm just using the clipping mask once again. And here we go.